So let me just provide a little bit of context for this panel, and then I will get out of the way and allow our faculty panelists to introduce themselves. As I said, this is the third of 5 faculty panels where we are showcasing some of our work to identify what we're really proud of that's distinct at Antioch and what brings us together as we're developing an academic vision for the future. And we are identifying interdisciplinary strengths that bring us together. We're identifying ways that we have really always led the way in embedding meaningful work into the Antioch experience, and also thinking about the current reality of Antioch as a small place of abundance and action, and looking for ways that that becomes a source of strength and pride. And one of those emerging areas of interdisciplinary strength, we're calling global engagement, or as of Tuesday, we're calling it global studies and engagement. We might hear more about that. And we're thinking very broadly about that. It's one key example of what we are and can be known for at Antioch. It brings together faculty and courses across all of the areas and all of the divisions and all of the disciplines that we have. And we're also really conscious of and proud that we're building on a long history of a college that has always changed lives. And it's always created graduates who are change makers, who go out to create positive change in the world, in their communities, in their professions, in the broader culture, and across the globe. We are thinking about how we're drawing on Antioch's history of not only introducing students to the expanse of the globe and all of the histories and cultures and experiences that it encompasses over time and over space, but also sending students out into the world for extended, meaningful, immersive experiences, especially through our language and culture program and our co-op program. And in this way, just as much as us, that that's a way for students to test classroom lessons through the lab of experience. And I'm also really proud that Antioch today is really leading the way in making global engagement, which has always been a hallmark of high quality liberal arts education, making it accessible to a remarkably diverse student body. Many of you might know that our current students, while we are a small place of abundance, it's a small place of remarkable diversity, with at least a quarter of our students are the first in their families to go to college. About half identify as students of color. Over 3/4 are eligible for the federal Pell Grant, which means that their expected family contribution is at or near zero. And so they might not otherwise have access to a liberal arts education, if not for the way that Antioch is making it accessible. And about the same amount of our students identify very broadly as LGBTQIA. So it's this small and remarkably diverse place in Yellow Springs, and we have a way of connecting our students to the big and remarkably diverse place called the Globe. And so today you're going to get a little bit of a flavor on how faculty are thinking expansively about how we introduce students to global studies and engagement as something we do particularly well. So we're going to very briefly introduce faculty panelists to let us know their name, their role at Antioch, in one sentence about what global engagement means at Antioch as we are wrestling with that broad and important frame that brings us together. So I'll just start with who appears on my screen first. So Rahul.
Thanks, Brian. My name is Rahul Nair. I'm my pronouns are he, him, his, and I am currently the Associate Professor for World History, teaching, I would say, mostly non-US history and other courses at Antioch. And for me, the global engagement really in Antioch has really been about recognizing the interconnectedness of the world, right? And from the students' perspective, a determination and the ability of our students to meet the world where it is, wherever they go, rather than where the students themselves are. And I think again and again in many of their experiences in co-ops and language and cultural immersion programs that they have undertaken, they have brought back their stories and further enriched the classes that they've taken. So that's, I think, what it means to me from my years at Antioch now.
Thanks, Rahul. Dean.
Hey everyone, I'm Dean Snyder, he, him. I'm Associate Professor of Political Economy, and I've been at Antioch College since 2015. For me, global studies and engagement centers on understanding that the problems we face as a species, frankly, are global in nature. We talk about, some scholars talk about a polycrisis that's occurring. It's political, economic, it's social, it's ecological in nature. So parsing the origins and nature of those crises out for students is key to the work that I do, teaching at Antioch, with the ultimate goal of students developing innovative resolutions to those problems.
Thank you, Dean. Luisa.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here tonight with all of you. My name is Luisa Bieri, she, her, hers. I'm a faculty member in our co-op department, and I've been here also with Antioch College since 2015. I wanted to share a quote that I have put up on my wall. I've had it on the wall of my office for a number of years now, and it's really about justice, but it sort of centers some of my ideas of what I feel rings true for Antioch's definition of justice, both from a global lens, but also from a sort of social lens. It's a Rebecca Solnit quote, and she says, "Justice is helping each other on the journey." And that for me has just always sort of represented part of where I see my purpose in co-op with our students, helping them discover their journey and help them along the way.
Thanks, Luisa. Cary.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cary Campbell, Associate Professor of French. Currently working as the Director of the Languages and Cultures Program at Antioch. And, pronouns. Il, lui. And if you want to tag the son, ça, c'est, but it doesn't really matter in French because that's about the thing, not the person. So I'd like to think global engagement, I don't want to try to theorize it into a single sentence because it's too broad, but I think of the task of a languages and cultures program as participating in it. And in that sense, we are the people that build the skills so that the students can have direct experiences with products and practices and perspectives that they wouldn't otherwise have direct experience with. And so whether or not they continue to use those skills of communication, part of global engagement to me means allowing them to come home and have some kind of standing to make informed comparisons so they can decide for themselves how they want their own culture to go, how to be change makers in their own culture, and how to adapt and remove their judgment faculties while they're still studying something, but then re-engaging them and choosing what they feel is right to help make the world a better place.
Thanks, Cary. And Lara. Laura, if you're trying to talk, I think you're muted.
I am technologically challenged. I apologize. My name is Lara Mitias, and I'm an associate professor of philosophy here at Antioch. I've been at Antioch since 2014, and I was hired specifically to help with the global diversity of the philosophy and to teach non-Western philosophies here. Since we lost my colleague, I now teach all of philosophy as a global program, as a global enterprise, which I believe philosophy is. And to me, at Antioch, global engagement is quite a special thing because of our size. We're able to address all issues in a way globally, depending on the discipline, and that we live in a very unique time, I find. And while our students are very aware of a lot of the crises that we have going on in the world today, we also live at a fabulous golden opportunity of having all the knowledge of time, and history and philosophies available to us on the internet, available to them. And so my hope as a teacher, as a philosophy teacher, is to give them enough perspective to be able to choose philosophical ideas to ground their ability to go forward in the world and be change makers and to do positive things in the world by consciously adopting the philosophies intentionally from the world that they find valuable, philosophies from the West that are valuable, philosophies from the Asian world that are valuable, from indigenous worlds that are valuable, and kind of create their new paradigm going forward in a very intentional way. So I believe the small size of Antioch makes that a possibility here, and I'm really grateful for that.
Thanks, Laura. So I have a few sort of general questions so that we could get a fuller picture of faculty work around global engagement, and then we'll open it out into the full audience. The first question's really just about teaching. As we've been developing and coming together around global engagement as a shared interdisciplinary strength, partly we've just become so aware of the ever lengthening list of courses that in some way contribute to that. It's almost as if which courses don't contribute to global engagement is our challenge. And so I'd be interested in hearing a bit from some of the faculty about what their favorite course to teach is related to global engagement and what they learn from Antioch students in the process. And I think I'll start with Rahul, who's been helping especially move faculty toward identifying these strengths, and this focus in particular has he's been leading on it. So,
sure. I mean, it's a strange choice that I'm going to make, perhaps, because I'm not particularly an area expert in the field, but I've actually really enjoyed teaching our history of a city with Japan with Tokyo as a focus, and I've been really, both really intrigued and in many ways fascinated by the enormous input that our students have been able to make that course. Because a few years earlier, I think before all COVID, etc., we did have consistently a number of students who did co-ops in Japan, some even in Tokyo. And for me, part of the enjoyment of teaching that course was to, have those moments when what is kind of theoretical, concepts kind of meet substantive experience, particularly as students narrate and flesh out some of these, concepts and historical kind of, I don't want to say peculiarities, but historical aspects of Tokyo and Japan. So it's one of those courses where I enjoy not being the expert and kind of having the students contribute to really opening up the course with what they have gleaned and understood, and then seeing their experience reflected also in the texts or in the material that we have covered. So that's one of those, I think, courses that I've particularly enjoyed teaching every now and then over the years.
Thanks, Rahul. And yeah, Japan seems to have a particular pull for many of our students. I think some folks on the call might know that Shane Creeping Bear, our Dean of Admissions, who's, I think, 06 is when he graduated. It was a struggle for him to graduate because he wanted to stay in Tokyo while he was on co-op, and it was hard to get him to come back and finish. But he did. He did. I think Dean also had a teaching moment they wanted to share.
Oh, sure. I'm currently teaching a course called Globalization and Development, and we look at the historical development of the world economy from colonialism up until today, up through the era of globalization. So it's kind of a broad scale look, right, at that historical development of the world economy. And, what students kind of get from it is that they sort of understand, the crisis moments we might be in, right? Whether it's economic recession, whether it's ecological, whether it's a crisis of legitimation of government, and kind of falling faith, in liberal democracy, things like that. But they don't understand how we got there. So that's what the course provides. And you see a lot of light bulbs kind of go off, in students' minds as you progress through that history. And, at the end of the day, students can kind of approach now these problems with a conceptual vocabulary and empirical knowledge that they didn't really have before. So it's empowering in that sense, because to develop any sort of resolutions to problems, you have to know their origins in nature, and that's what we cover in that course.
Great, thanks, Dean. We've been doing a lot of thinking about the sort of distinct and special kinds of teaching and learning that we have on offer, especially ways in which our teaching and courses engage some of the unique aspects of our physical campus, as well as the way that some of our distinct programs like Language and Culture and Co-op engage the world experientially and uniquely, so that our students put the liberal arts in action. So I'd be interested in hearing from some faculty about how your teaching or your advising has engaged in particular parts of campus or particular programs that students are able to learn at Antioch that they might not be able to learn or experience elsewhere. So Luisa, you might have some unique insight onto this, given you're our co-op contact today.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I don't have to explain what co-op is to the alumni on this wonderful call tonight. But I do want to tell you guys maybe just a little bit about where we're at these days in co-op. As you know, we support and we teach students that are out in field experiences all around the globe. We've had students in about 38 countries or so since the reopening. And it represents about 15% of our co-ops overall, our international co-ops. We definitely had a lull during the pandemic, but more over the past year and a half, we've started really being able to have students go abroad again. I wanted to share a couple of quick stories about some students, but also mention that one of my favorite course assignments that I teach in a cultural immersion co-op class that I teach for students who are out in the world doing a cultural immersion co-op. They work on cultural asset mapping. So they're engaged in sort of place-based learning as they map out what are the areas and places of significance in and around their new home, wherever they are abroad. And so it could be local murals and parks or museums and cafes that they're starting to explore and enjoy. And it's really about kind of discovering where they are and encouraging them to get out and taste the cuisine and explore the city and, really engage while they're there. So I've had some amazing cultural asset maps made over the years by the students. I wanted to mention CJ McGilvery, who's now in their 4th year at Antioch. CJ did a co-op in France last spring and then in Ecuador in the fall, and also a Spanish language and a French language capstone to boot. Congratulations to CJ and Cary for your work with that. CJ at one point this fall told me, CJ had never been outside of the country before coming to Antioch, was from Texas, and said, now, like after doing this, all I want to do is really travel and engage the world, and I want to go into the Peace Corps. And so that is CJ's plan for post-graduation. Our student Emma Jones was just in Bermuda in the fall. Emma was doing research at the Bermuda Institute of Oceanic Sciences. She was looking at sustainability around coral reef ecosystems. And most of her time actually was in the lab or in a full scuba gear with her team of scientists underwater in the ocean. But she also explored the towns nearby and hunkered down during Hurricane Fiona. Everyone was fine, but that was also an interesting, moment of being really out there in the Atlantic during the hurricane. So I'm sure all of you have some amazing co-op stories, but those are just a couple from this fall.
Thanks, Luisa. And I love how we don't do surface immersion, we do full engagement. I'd love to hear, maybe Cary might be able to offer a bit more of that too.
Yeah, thanks for opening that up. I'm glad you brought up CJ, Luisa. I want to hammer down a little bit more on her story if I can. So co-op works miracles. Like, I'm literally in awe. CJ had a self-design that involved political economy elements and historical elements, and she wanted in France to, her assignment for a capstone project was to identify a project that she could do in country. And usually those involve, taking surveys of native informants and that kind of thing. She wanted, because of this political economy self-design, she wanted to kind of ramp up into her senior work by looking into how France does nonprofit. Well, it turns out that co-op placed her in a job in which some of her daily contacts happen to run a nonprofit. And she was able to take that experience, run with it, learn about how there's differences in business administrations in dealing with things like getting sight technology to the blind. And she came back, put on a presentation. Well, I'm the only one that's seen it so far, but it will be public when we do our senior colloquia days. I hope some of you can join for that. But it's just amazing work, broadened her horizons. She came back able to say, there's a few things that I like here that I'd like to see implemented, and she can work toward that here in the US. And there's other things where she thought, these are the roadblocks that I know ahead of time that will get in the way of what we'd like to do here in the US. And so she can navigate those now too. A lot more I could say about that.
Thanks, Cary. And yeah, we just had Co-op Swap as a community meeting this week, and CJ was one of the panelists, and so impressive and in the way that she's able to talk about these global experiences and digest them for meaning. So young. Wanted to also get a little bit of a sense of faculty and their own inquiry and questions, how global engagement is the lens that they might pursue. And also you've heard a little bit about how at a small place like Antioch, it really stretches faculty to be utility players and stretch themselves into teaching areas at the edge of their knowledge, not just at the center of their knowledge, which I think is a really wonderful experience. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how questions of global engagement infuse, or what kinds of questions you're pursuing in your own research, and if there are particular ways that being at Antioch has shaped your scholarly agenda in ways that maybe were unexpected or surprising to you. And we haven't heard from Lara yet, and I know Lara just came back from sabbatical and a trip to India, so we might get to hear a bit about that, or some other aspect of their scholarship. Lara.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I was off mute that whole time. I apologize. Being at Antioch has changed my scholarly career in a direction that I had not intended at all. I graduated thinking my dissertation was extremely lengthy. It was largely analytical. It was very research oriented, highly complex. I thought I would end up at a research university doing comparative philosophy, which is what my dissertation or my PhD is in, doing very technical work in Sanskrit. I came to Antioch because of the wonderful reputation and history that it has for being so far ahead of its time that it wasn't even anywhere on the map that far ahead of its time. And I'm very impressed with that. And I wanted to be a part of that history. I'm from Ohio. So I got roped into an Ohio job, and Antioch is a very practical place. And we have students who really want things that they can use. And we were encouraged to be very experimental. So my own scholarly endeavor has been changed entirely from very complicated technical philosophy that would only be interesting to scholars, to trying to address questions that are much more interesting nowadays to people who don't have a background in philosophy, and trying to make them more understandable. The technical aspects of Asian philosophy make it more understandable to people who only encounter it as a co-opted maybe phenomenon in the West and are only getting a very reduced version of it. So that's not where I thought I would end up at all, but in the end, it seems like it's a better place to be because maybe there are more people needed in my position than there are scholars. Maybe there are better people for that. So yes, and I just got a restorative yoga teacher certificate, thanks to Antioch's wonderful opportunity for professional development in India, where it was for yoga teachers only. But even though I wasn't a professional yoga teacher, I've been doing yoga my whole life. I never got a certificate, and they accepted me because of my philosophical background to take this training. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think you're teaching a philosophy of yoga class too. So it's coming full circle, which is so neat. Another really good development that I'm aware of, Luisa just this week got a really neat article accepted that brings some of the co-op experience into global studies and theory, as pedagogical theory. So maybe we could hear a little bit of that fresh win from the week.
Sure. Yeah, I was pretty excited. This was a piece that I had worked on before the pandemic, and then the pandemic kind of has put so much on hold, including publishing. But yeah, the editors reached out. So it's a new anthology in women's and gender studies. And my chapter will be included in the book. It's going to be upcoming this year with the University of Illinois Press, and it's called Feminist Collaborations and Radical Interconnectedness, Intersectional and Transnational Approaches for Teaching and Learning. That's the title of the anthology. And so my chapter in that is looking at the transnational piece as it relates to co-op. And one of the things I talk about is sort of how co-op has really been a generative shift away from kind of a traditional study abroad model, and one that allows our students to really become trained in more as scholar activists abroad in global learning, and to engage with organizations abroad and faculty mentoring abroad that can really shift that model in exciting ways. And so one of the case studies that I talk about in the article is how a number of Antioch students and myself have engaged with an ongoing collaboration with a group called MAT in Argentina, Mujeres de Arte Tomar. And they're a feminist performance troupe that has done a lot of street performance addressing a broader movement to end gender violence. And we've had students go on co-op and work with MAT, and then I brought them for a performance class at Antioch a couple years ago. And so that was just one of the case studies around scholar activism abroad for our students that I feel like the co-op model can really activate.
Thanks, Luisa. And the inverse of that is, I know a lot of the faculty have found ways to involve students in their own research, and I wonder if anyone on the call has an example of that. And I really don't know, so it's a question.
I can speak a little bit to
Go for
that.
it.
My last wonderful student, Bieri, who's a student of Cary's as well. And Cary and I got to teach a conjoined class on French philosophy for him. He's still working on philosophy and we still work together. And it's wonderful because of, I don't know whether it's because we had so many classes together or whether it's just a nice fit, but we tend to study kind of similar things naturally. So I think that as many people in Antioch are probably going to find, who are once their students are going to become their colleagues and eventually work with them. So I just wanted to share that conjoining.
Great. Well, I do want to make sure we leave time to invite the rest of the folks in here. So let me just ask one question, and I think Tristan can unlock the mics if that's what's happening. We think a lot about how the proof is in the outcomes of what our students go on to do in the world and what kind of impact they make in the world after Antioch. And so I'd love to hear a few examples from folks about what recent students have gone on to do in the world, thanks to their global engagement work, either in co-op or research experiences or the kind of work they went on to do. Maybe Luisa can get us started on that.
Sure. I think, we're also proud of our students. I love talking about them. I'm going to keep it short. Maybe I'll talk about three briefly. Anna Samake was class of 19. After co-ops that Anna did in Ecuador, also in Mali and West Africa. She also worked with the Black Alliance for Just Immigration in New York City that's founded by Opal Tometi, one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. Anna is just a force, and we just found out she has recently been hired with the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution. It's a network of international and national agencies that are doing public health global work, and so she's there in New York City, sending her regards. Many of us worked with Anna over the years. Taylor Spratt was the class of 2017, and she just finished a Fulbright in Brazil. She was an English teaching assistant, but they had her delivering a mini course to all of these different students. I think she said she worked with like over 300 students around a critical global citizenship education for the students there. And she focused on Freirean pedagogy and actually got to also present at a Freire conference there in Brazil, which is super exciting. Dean has worked a lot with Kenzie Zelaya, the class of 21. Kenzie has become an integral member of the staff of CARICEN, which is the Central American Resource Center in Houston, working with immigrants from Central America. That was actually one of Kenzie's co-ops, and they invited her back, and they were like, please, please. She's a paralegal there supporting their law team, and she was accepted to Rice University's master's program in global affairs this year. And so those are just a few snapshots. I also wanted to mention, just because we've had about 6 or 7 students since maybe 2015 participate in, it's a program called Auxiliares de Conversación, run by the Spanish government. And they invite foreign nationals to come teach English in schools all across Spain. And we've had a lot of our graduates who have gone on to teach for a year. It's a year-long commitment. Heather Linger, who was in the class of 2017, she ended up staying for 3 years, because after being in Barcelona teaching English, she went to Madrid, and then she said, actually, I'm going to stay and get a master's in graphic design while she's living in Madrid. And she's just returned to the States about 6 months ago to live in New York. So those are just some highlights.
Great, thanks, Luisa. What an impressive list. Sometimes I think about how our current students can be kind of intimidated the more that we talk about history and the generations of Antiochians before. And it's so not fair. They've got just a few years in the world, and folks on this call have a few extra years a head start on them. And so the more we can remind ourselves of how quickly some of our students are able to be engaged in some of this meaningful work, reminds us of how we're setting them up uh, to jump into the world faster than maybe others would have. I want to clear some space and give others a chance to weigh in, either with questions for our faculty, or if you have some stories that we can learn from on your end of what you went on into the world to do from a global perspective. We'd love to hear that as well. And Robert, I think finally we can hear you.
Yeah. Geez, I'm kind of disappointed. Excuse me. I came here thinking this was going to be global engagements was an international dating service, but boy, I'm at the wrong place. No, on a serious note, I've spent after Antioch, I've spent and still live abroad and haven't lived in the States since then. But the comment I want to make is what you've been discussing is sort of, I would say, from the academic context, and it's all fine. There's nothing wrong with anything you said. It's just my experience listening to what people are saying and then thinking about it. To be effective in global engagement outside of dating, there's really three factors that come into play. Language, which everyone's going to, of course, nod immediately. Secondly, which is very important, is understanding the priorities in the other culture. In order to be effective, you can't assume that your cultural biases and your priorities are the same as theirs. You have to understand that. And that you can learn, at least most people can, some can't. The third one, I don't know how you learn it, and that is being able, I would say it's good interpersonal skills. And I don't mean just being polite, but being knowing how to interact with individuals to get what you want, or to get them to align with your way of thinking, not from a cultural bias that you have to think like I do, but if you want to accomplish something, you have to understand their cultural priorities. And you just can't understand that, but you also have to understand how to not massage, but not manipulate, but the adjective I think I'm using is malleable. Sort of mold them in the direction that you want to go, or get their cooperation, if that makes any sense. Those are the three components, and some people are successful in all of them, and others only in a few. And the third one, regarding being able to understand and interact with people in a constructive way and get what you want, that's the hardest one to learn. I don't think haven't been bad at it, but I've seen people a lot better than I. That's all I want to say. Silence, is that
no, well, I was just going to add to that, Robert, just because I'm compelled by what you're sharing. And there's a chapter that I share with co-op students. They take a preparation class of how to prepare for co-op, and it's an Adrienne Marie Brown chapter called Intentional Adaptation. And that idea of how we also have to become more malleable and really think intentionally about how do we approach change and our own openness to adaptation. And I think that that's a really personal reflection that students do, and it's highly experiential, right? We learn it by adapting, by changing, by and I think that our students right now have experienced so much with the pandemic and so many forms of adaptation, even just coming to college, right? So I try and encourage them and think about what are these other situations in which they've already demonstrated an amazing amount of malleability and adaptation, that now they're going to be intentional about dreaming maybe bigger and farther away with how they can do that, but that they actually have a starting place to think about the ways that they've already done some of that change work in their lives.
It's evident you understand what I'm trying to say. Okay, thanks. Thanks for the
Yeah,
clarification.
absolutely. No, I could talk about it all day.
Mm,
I think I saw a hand from Joan.
Okay, I unmuted myself. I don't have a question, but I do have an answer to a question that you asked, Brian, and that was about our favorite courses. And when I was a faculty member, my favorite course, hands down, my field was philosophy, like yours, Lara. And I was teaching a course in comparative ethics. And for that course, that was at Denison and then other places. For that course, I saved half the seats for American students and half the seats for international students. So I would have informants in the class. And I learned so much. I mean, it was my favorite course that I ever taught because I learned so much. I learned, of course, I was in charge when we talked about theoretical issues such as comparative, such as cultural relativism. But when we talked about the values and the ethical stances of our students, I learned a huge amount that has really made a difference in my life. So I just wanted to answer the question that you had asked by an experience of my own. I don't know if that resonates with you, Lara, but that's what I did.
You know, I haven't met you before, but I would love to talk to you about that sometime. I teach comparative ethics as well, and I would love to develop my class more. So I'm going to write down your name and try to contact you if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. I would love to talk about that class. We had so much fun. We had meals together so we could learn about table manners and practices in the family. We watched movies. We just had so much.
Great. Nice to meet you.
Taught it several times.
Jay.
I have a question. I'm really interested in the co-op, especially the co-op abroad. You haven't talked about the jobs. What kind of jobs? Do they make enough money to live there? And how do they find? I remember when I was in Antioch, there was a whole structure to help you find where to live and talk to other people, support. When it's international, go to Argentina. How do they know where to live? Do they make enough money to support themselves? You know, so I'm interested. Question is about the job as well. You know, you've talked very well about the experience and what they've gained, but I'm interested in how the co-op structure and jobs work.
Sure, I'm happy to just respond for a couple of minutes, Jay, and then I'm happy to talk offline too. So right now, the country of Australia has something called a working holiday visa for young people who actually can get a work permit to come to Australia and work for anywhere between 3 to 9 months or 12 months. And that's one of the few countries where our students actually can go and get a job and get paid. We have a wonderful alum from, I believe, 84, Lincoln Kern, who runs it's an organization called Practical Ecology. They do removal of invasive species and controlled burns. And so we've had a number of ecology students go to Australia and work for his company, and they get paid on payroll, and it's fantastic. A lot of our other international co-ops, the jobs are more volunteer work in exchange often for room and board. Instead of getting paid a wage because of wage laws, et cetera, it's often as a form of compensation. They will provide students with lodging and some meals to work on an organic farm, for example. We've had a number of students, actually when Alexis was in, or CJ was in France, started as an au pair. We've had a range of jobs in which students are also contributing directly to the organization, but again, through a kind of volunteer model. And then we have a few selective fellowships to support students to go abroad, particularly to be able to cover their international airfare, round trip airfare, plus some support for housing. If, for example, when students are going to Argentina, if the housing is not provided, we help them locate. We've had like a couple of students will go in together on an apartment, and that fellowship that is essentially has been an endowed fellowship from some alumni from Antioch, really provides the support so that even our students who, as Brian was explaining, we have about 75% of our student body that are eligible for Pell Grants that come from high need financial backgrounds. And so even they are definitely eligible to go abroad on co-op and get this financial support so that they don't have to worry, how am I going to cover my flight? How am I going to cover, my food or my housing when I'm there? And that fellowship support has been critical in helping sort of create a sense of equity around our co-ops abroad. That's something that I really admire about the co-op program, because when I came out of study abroad, I wasn't seeing that in the more traditional model. It was much more kind of for more of an elite, more wealthy, student experience. And Antioch, I feel like we've really tried to level the playing field. So those are just some examples, but I'm happy to talk to you more, Jay, offline.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You actually answered my second question about how can the Pell students do it. So thank you. You've really answered my question.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons we rely so much on previous Antiochians paying it forward, especially for the next generation who this is the kind of experience that we would hope all students have access to, but a place like Antioch is doing it right. I think I saw Anna. Did you have your hand up earlier? I think we're both on mute. There you go.
I wanted to respond to something that Robert was talking about living in another culture, quite without it being my intention. Some years after graduating in '64, our family ended up living in Italy for 3 years. It had entirely to do with my husband's that we were aiming for. It was an opportunity that presented itself. And there were about a dozen families that were part of this program. And I think because of my experience at Antioch, because I didn't participate in Antioch education abroad as it was at the time, but I did have 3 months in Guanajuato. And because a number of my classes were in anthropology, I think I was particularly well for dealing with this experience. And of the adults and the 12 families that were there, I think I was ahead of the rest of them in being able to ask the right questions of being in this experience, of finding ourselves in a new culture and having to cope with everything new all at once, and start the process of learning the language and how to talk with people, and not just how to say them, but to know what were the right questions to ask and how to approach the experience. I had a great advantage in being in that experience and in helping my family with it too.
Thanks, Anna. And I've been thinking about how Rahul and Dean were talking about, even in the classroom, trying to introduce a global engagement frame by helping students understand and sit with complexity and interconnectedness. And I got to tell you, students don't come to Antioch able to sit comfortably with complexity often, but boy, do they leave that way. And it's partly to Jay's question, like just figuring out how to feed oneself in a country not their own, and understanding the theoretical complexity at the systemic level that Rahul and Dean were talking about. I do think that's something that Antioch does particularly well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have time for another question or story or two. So Joan.
Just a quick comment. As a member of the of the advancement staff. I don't know if you all know that I work for the college from my home in California. But as a member of the advancement staff, I just want to remind people that they can contribute and designate their contributions for the support of co-ops abroad. And that's very welcome under the Antioch Works program. This is a great way to spend your money.
Thanks, Joan. And as Luisa was saying, quite literally, many of our students simply wouldn't have an international experience without that investment in them.
That's right. We appreciate your work, Joan, and all of the contributions that people have made over the years. It's made a huge difference. Just incredible.
I'd love to get one final question or story from one of the alumni on the call. Go ahead, Cary.
I'm wondering if I could maybe trigger one. I was interested to hear, Anna, your story about how an Antioch education had prepared you to be adaptable to an international situation. Did you take anything back from Italy that you could then that changed the way you worked back when you got back to home?
Oh, Anna, I think you're on mute.
I'm chewing on that one. I think our whole family knows that our worldview from having been in that experience. I know somebody else who went through a similar experience, and they write it off by saying, well, people who haven't lived abroad, they just had too short a vein. You can't explain it to them. And that's too simple. But I think to start explaining it to somebody would be, you have to remember that the world has a lot of lens, and the lens that you're used to reviewing the world through is by far not the only one. And you have to try to see the world through other lenses, and that's your first job in adapting to a new place. You can't understand these things that are confusing to you by looking at it through your own lens. You have to borrow another lens.
Well,
I don't know how Antioch taught me that, but did.
I'd also like to chime in that the co-op experience, I think, really made a huge impact on my life in both professionally and adapting. 1961, I Penn State Computer Center to hire me as a programmer. So I got into programming extremely early, which was very important in the work I did. Also, the living in different cities and figuring out how to do that and working at different jobs. It sounds naive now, but in 1968, when Nixon looked to win the presidency, I was convinced the United States was going to become fascist. And even though I was beyond the draft, I emigrated to Canada because I didn't like what Nixon was going to do. And I lived in Canada for 5 years. And I think I could do that because of my experiences at Antioch. And I'd like to add to the comments of how important it is to live abroad, even in Canada, which is probably the smallest difference you can have from the United States. Even there, you learn a lot about yourself in the United States. And it was a very important experience to have, to live outside the United States, even in Ontario, the English-speaking part of Canada, not Quebec, which would be more. So I attribute a lot of the path in my life to the experiences I had in the co-op system. So I can attest to the importance of that.
Thanks, Jay. And you have a Canadian on the call with Cary on faculty.
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of folks' time, and I hope this gave you just, a little bit of a flavor. Oh, go ahead, Anna. Or,
Robert is
Joan.
today is in Canada as well.
Great. I hope this gave you a little taste of some of the good work that the faculty are doing, both to carry on, the tradition of global engagement that's, been a hallmark of Antioch, and also adapting it for, the current world as it is post-pandemic, and the changing interests and needs of our students. I've learned a ton, and I hope you've learned some as well. Thank you to all the faculty participants. Thank you everyone for your time, and thanks to Tristan, who is behind the scenes organizing all of this. I hope some of you might join us for the final 2 faculty panels coming up, one on socially engaged arts, and one on social innovation and social enterprise. And there's also lots of coffee and co-op sessions too that you might chime in on as well. So thanks to everybody, and enjoy your evening.